Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to try and help you to understand how to stop losing your customers and help them not leave you. To do that, today we're going to be joined by Mark Copeman and Lindsay, Williott, and they're the co-founders of Customer Thermometer, and we'll introduce those for you in a moment. First, a little bit about myself. I'm Gary McGrath, and I'm the Customer Success Consultant at Kayako. So I'm responsible for understanding the challenges that our customers are facing, and then working internally with our own support teams to meet those challenges and help our customers. So let's move on to a bit about Kayako. The main idea behind Kayako is we help our customers get better at customer service, and we do that in various ways. And we currently are used by about 35,000 organisations around the world, and they use us to deliver great support to our customers and their customers. So let's go on to our co-host today. So we actually are joined by Lindsay, Williott, and Mark Copeman. And as I said before, these are actually the co-founders of Customer Thermometer. Customer Thermometer was founded in 2011 to help solve kind of problems that people are facing when they're trying to run their own marketing agencies. So they both joined forces to join Customer Thermometer, and the idea behind this platform is it actually helps customers kind of get feedback from their customers and in simple clicks on interfaces. And it's now used by thousands of users across 50 countries around the world. So at the end of today's webinar, we are actually giving away a 3-month Customer Thermometer jumper account. So make sure you take part on our Twitter and use the tweet using "Stop Customers Leaving," and we'll randomly take in someone from those tweets, and they'll actually win that 3-month Customer Thermometer account. At the end of the webinar, we will also have a Q&A as well, so you can go ahead and actually ask your questions. You can do this in a couple of ways. You can also tweet us on Twitter. You can also ask questions in the GoToWebinar interface as well. So you check the GoToWebinar, you'll see we actually have a questions box, and in there feel free to ask any questions you might actually have throughout the demonstration, and obviously we'll answer those at the end as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mark to start his introduction.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, everybody, wherever you're listening to this around the world. My name is Mark Copeman. I'm the co-founder of Customer Thermometer, as Gary mentioned. I'm going to be talking for about 25 minutes or so, and I'm going to try and make this as practical as I possibly can. So, I was sat at my desk in late 2007, and I had an alert come through from a customer. I was working at a marketing agency at the time. And the alert, I was actually with this customer a couple of days previous, and he was absolutely happy. The company was delivering for him. And the alert came through because he was unhappy. He was disappointed. And so the system that we had in place at the time meant I had to get on the phone to this guy within an hour or two and find out what was wrong. And so I did. And it turned out that we'd been inviting some of his colleagues to a particular event, but not him. So I was able to obviously fix that up pretty quickly, and he went away very, very happy. And it was that moment, I can absolutely pinpoint it, where I had this epiphany around understanding what customers are really thinking and how important that is, and particularly when it comes to this silent killer, which we call churn, a silent killer in business at least. And that is really what this presentation is all about. It's about giving you some practical tips which you can go back into your business and actually use yourself or instill into others, about how to reduce this leaky bucket, because it's not a sexy subject. People are bonused on the stuff coming into that, but actually putting plasters around the holes at the bottom is actually rarely talked about. And so that's what we're going to focus on today. It's a little bit like when you put money into a savings account and you're earning, perhaps 1%, but actually your credit card balance is costing you 19%. So that's the idea today. Let me show you this in a really graphical way, and this is not rocket science, but the effect of compound is what churn is all about. So that y-axis could be anything. It could be profit, it could be revenue, it could be absolute numbers. If you have a 20% churn rate in your business over the course of a year, you will lose nearly 50% of your business in 12 months. It's that simple. So it's a really, really important thing to be focusing on in a business. And for those of you in the UK, you remember and recognize some of these household names that were on our high streets over the last few years. As I was putting this presentation together, it just made me realize how many of these businesses are no longer, And actually, when you delve into this a little bit, the sole reason for their decline, of course, and their eventual demise is because they ran out of customers. The customers did not keep coming back to them. You can make all the excuses in the world, but that is the reason for the demise of all of these high street names. Let's look at this another way. Here's a survey from the Rockefeller Corporation a few years back. And whilst the top bar is a little sad, the bottom one is the thing that we focus on and have done really for the last 5 years in our business. And that is answering the question, why will a customer typically leave you? And the thing I really want to point out here is that there is no mention of price or quality here. It's all about the fact that these customers are leaving because they just feel that you as a business are indifferent to them. You just don't care enough. You might feel that you do, but if you're not showing it, then you will lose customers, end of story. So that's what this presentation is all about. I'm going to give you 10 things to take back to your business. As I say, try and make this as practical as possible. So let's get into the meat of this. Topic number 1, make a customer, not a sale. And I've got a couple of things to talk about around this. I've been in a sales organization myself many times, and the pressures of selling are always there. And what tends to happen is, if you're not careful, as you get to the end of quarters and end of years, you start to fit square pegs into round holes. Customers that were actually not properly suited to your business, you are persuading and cajoling in to contracts or to buy services or whatever it may be. And actually that can have a really detrimental effect on your business because you then will spend so much more effort trying to service that customer during the life of that contract as opposed to going out initially and finding out that win-win at the very beginning. So trying to find customers where that natural fit is there is a really, really good thing to do. Crowbarring a deal does not work long term. Another example of this, and I spend a lot of our time talking about this subject, and that is when you make a customer, not a sale, the idea is once you've won that customer to continue the conversation. Don't sell something and run away. Now that conversation can be done in many, many different ways. It could be semi-automated, but actually there is no substitute for picking up the phone or being face-to-face with customers. Let me give you some examples. This picture here you see on screen was actually taken a couple of weeks ago. I got on a plane, I went to the States, and I went to a number of different cities just to meet some of our customers and prospects, and as it happened, partners. I happened to bump into Snowmageddon on the East Coast, and it was a beautiful thing once we finally got there. But it was just so wonderful to walk into offices and to be greeted like a long-lost friend and to be told how people are feeling about Customer Thermometer, what a difference it's making to their business. And as a result, I got a lot of feedback from that as well. We traveled a lot of miles, there was a lot of salt, and I was properly inspired by it. I even wrote a blog post up a couple of days ago to explain how well it went. So the idea of constantly talking to customers may not seem like a new one, but believe me, it's really, really important. One of the guys I met out there, a founder of a business that's been going for 15 years, apparently I even inspired him. He said, I've been wanting to do this customer road trip for years. He said, I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to go and do this now. It just makes sense. If you don't believe me, believe one of the greatest marketers of our time, Tom Peters. And at the end of this presentation, I should add, there is a whole bunch of links, or is a link to a bunch of links. This is one of the PDFs you can download. His book, Ways to Pursue Excellence. Number 72, as you see there, he's simply saying, have you called a customer today? And it applies to 100% of us. So we do this a lot. We had another example where we picked up the phone to a customer fairly recently who told us that we kind of like you guys, but actually you're not doing what we want you to do with this particular piece of functionality. And we said, hang on a second, actually we do. And they hadn't realized it. And soon after that, they actually became a case study customer for us. So again, the power of picking up the phone. And this is not new. This has been going on since 1916. Here's a final quote on this subject from LL Bean, the clothing manufacturer. So they sell outdoor clothing. I do not consider a sale complete until the goods are worn out and the customer is still satisfied. So lots of food for thought there. Number 2. This is something you're probably aware of, but to actually have it shown to you in a graphical format was a really good thing for me, and I love talking about this one. The idea of the service recovery paradox, and it's very, very simple. Things go wrong in business, and the more you can empower yourself, your teams, to actually take action and really deal with things when things go wrong, you will keep that customer for life. So let me explain this in a fraction more detail. We have customer loyalty on the y-axis and we have time on the x-axis here. And when something does go wrong, you get a dip in that loyalty. Everyone gets upset and unhappy. But actually, if you put in the right time and resources and effort to fix the inevitable problems, actually over time, you will find that you will build a more loyal customer than if that service issue hadn't happened in the first place. Now we've got, I'm sure you may have examples of this within your business. We've got a really good example of this. It happened to us about 3 years ago. We had an issue with the application and it caused a real problem for one of our customers. We wanted to bury our heads in the sand, but that was the last thing we were going to do. It was a Friday afternoon, you know the moment. And actually, we worked tirelessly all weekend to put in a report about what had gone wrong, how we were going to fix it, and just all the circumstances around it, which was literally on a whole bunch of desks on the Monday morning. And we were actually told later on that week, once the emotion had been taken out of it, it was the best remedial report they'd ever seen. And 3 years later, the graph that you're looking at there just could not be more true. We are completely across this business and we have advocates all over it. So it really does work. Empower your people to do the right thing when things go wrong. British Airways think the same thing too. Things do go wrong, but make sure you fix them properly and customers will stay with you for life. I suspect there's a lot of people on this call who are involved in the support world who I would hope will agree with this next statement. Support is more important than sales. We certainly feel this as a business, and I'm going to give you 2 or 3 examples here of how this is a good thing. Those of you in the UK will recognise Waitrose, the supermarket, part of the John Lewis partnership, and they very much set themselves apart from the pack by the way that they treat their customers in-store and online. And if you walk into a Waitrose store and you ask where a particular item is on the shelf, they are trained, the assistants, and we know this because we've actually worked with them in a business sense, to put down what they're doing and actually physically take you, the customer, to the other side of the store to show you where this item is and have a conversation on the way. They're not going to point at it. They're not going to tell you it's the back of aisle 3. They will take you there. So going that extra mile makes such a difference. If I can talk about what we do, and I'm properly inspired by one of the guys that works with us who leads our customer service team. His name is Jake, and he runs the Ministry of Magic, as we call it. In the last few months, he's actually been poached 6 times from different customers who've offered him a job. Fortunately, he's not taken them. But his motto around this area is you answer the question, but you then give another 10% or another 20%. You give extra. You go the extra mile. And what I would recommend is that when you go back to your desk, to your jobs, if your business doesn't already have everybody spending some time in the support area of your business, you're doing something wrong. From the chief exec down to anybody in your business, make sure they spend time on the support help desk, whether it be on the phone or the email. World leaders like Basecamp and Zapier absolutely do this. I suspect Kayako do the same. Thoroughly recommend that because support is more important than sales. You'll recognize this screen grab here from the very famous movie Pretty Woman, and of course the phrase here is big mistake. And the concept of treating every customer equally when they walk through your physical door, if you're in a retail environment, your online door, wherever it may be, and not judging them by the clothes that they're wearing, their email address, or their position in the company, is absolutely the right thing to do. Because I'm sure many of you in online businesses, you'll see people signing up with Gmail addresses and so on. Treat them equally to the apple.com address that comes through the door, because you just don't know who's behind it. And we do this as a business. We have a lot of people signing up with personal email addresses, and a brilliant example quite recently, about 7 or 8 months ago, we had a Gmail address sign up. We treated them absolutely equally to everybody else in our support and the way we were working with them. Turns out to be one of the biggest contracts we've ever had, because they are one of the county governments in Colorado, and we're now rolling out our service right across that particular county. So treating customers equally is a really, really good thing to be doing. My daughter inspired me the other day. She's 8. I came in to my office, I looked at my whiteboard, and she's obviously a Customer Thermometer advocate, of course she is, and she, quite unprompted, drew what you see on screen on my whiteboard. The little icons, the how are you feeling today, And it really inspired me in the concept of keeping things like child play. Customers love simplicity. Okay, they hate complexity. They hate being given an email back with, 5 things to go and do. Keep things simple throughout your workflows and processes. So 1 thing per email. Web pages that do 1 thing or explain 1 thing, so it's not a complicated set of elements on a single page. Clear calls to action. Take pain away from people. And another brilliant test. My son's actually now 12, but the advice I've always been given is when you create something new, whether it be a new message, a product, a service, or even a web page, run it past an 11-year-old. Figure out if they can understand it, and if they get your message, then the chances are the message is good. If they're confused by it, go back and think again. So keep things simple for customers because simplicity really, really works. Keep it like child play. Number 6 is around doing the right thing, having the right morals, having the right vision for your business. And I appreciate, as you listen to this, you're perhaps one person within a much bigger team, and it's hard to instill a culture across a business, but it's something I would encourage. Obviously, you recognize the "don't be evil" phrase. You can decide for yourselves if you feel Google is living up to that or not. You then have situations like this with Volkswagen, and honestly, somebody inside that business decided that the emission scandal was the right thing to do, and it's like, how on earth can that possibly be the right thing to do? So inside your business, do things like refunding without question, grandfathering people into pricing schemes. When people want to be unsubscribed, unsubscribe them properly. Don't be tricky, don't piss people off, because they will tell plenty of others. They will annoy people. And you know what? They may not be right for you at this moment, but if you treat them right, they will at least have respect for you, and they may come back another term. Because at the end of the day, short-term gain is not the answer here. This is about long-term gain. Now, that's all quite negative. So if I put slightly more positive spin on it, there's actually, we work with this particular business, Cleaning for a Reason, a wonderful organisation, and they clean houses for free of women who are suffering from cancer, which is a wonderful cause, and they're doing the right thing. You may raise money for charity in your business. Whatever it may be, doing the right thing is the right thing to do. And I tell you what, there is nothing wrong with telling the world about it as well, talking about what you do, because at the end of the day, your customers are human beings, and they like to be associated with companies who are doing the right thing. And in my book, what goes around comes around. That good karma absolutely applies to business as well. This is one of my favourite ones around keeping customers, because again, it's a theme, isn't it, really? Customers are human beings, and actually being memorable stirs an emotion in people, because they actually recollect how a company has treated them. So being memorable is a really important thing, and let me give you some examples of this, because in our day-to-day businesses, the idea is scaling and volume. This is a great example. Y Combinator, the big incubator I'm aware of, it is all about automation and workflow and scale and volume. However, one of the founders of this business, Paul Graham, wrote quite a famous essay a few years back called, and there's a link to this at the end of the presentation, "Do Things That Don't Scale." And I really, really like this, because in this massive automation and automated emails and so on, you can become a bit of a robot and treat customers like a robot. But actually, if you break into that once in a while and do things which are truly memorable, which are personal, which are unique, then you start to get people's attention, and they start to talk about you, and that loyalty factor starts to build up. We do this sometimes with customers. We create specific pages. This is a great tip. It really, really works. So if you're looking to send something to somebody as a link in an email, actually create it with your domain name / David Jones. Because when they see that personal link in an email, people will relate to that. It's personal. It's memorable. So think about those sorts of things. Let me give you another couple of examples. I had a wonderful mentoring meeting with a gentleman for about a year or so ago, persuaded him to give me 30 minutes of his time. I wanted to thank him, so I actually mocked up one of our email thermometers. I printed it on a card. And you know what? I actually hand wrote and put a stamp on it, and I actually used the Royal Mail to send it to him, which really these days is quite an unusual thing to do. And I had a call back from his PA a couple of days later who thanked me on his behalf. And he, I would like to think now, remembers that interaction. That wouldn't happen to him every day of the week. So think about ways of being memorable. Here's another great one. I was working in Dubai a couple of years ago. I came back to my room after a day's work, and I found this letter, which I hope you can read, with a new deodorant stick, because apparently my one had almost, and I must stress the word almost, run out. Okay, I had definitely used it, and they'd replaced it because, well, do you know what? They thought that I might need another one. It cost them $1, but I still talk about this example. How many hotels do that? So the Oberoi Hotel in Dubai, that is a really memorable thing. I've got 3 more to go. Now these are kind of related to our feedback world that we live in, but they're all really, really important elements when it comes to keeping customers. And the first one is around encouraging customer complaints. There's been books written on this. We've actually written an ebook ourselves. I had a conversation, one of my many conversations with customers a few weeks ago. He said to me, Mark, I love your service, and there was a but coming, so I was prepared for it. And he said, the problem is I'm not getting enough negative feedback. Now I smiled because I was kind of confused by that, but we talked it through, and I understand where he was coming from. He needs that negative, that criticism in order to improve. And we thought a lot about this over the years because it's what we do every day. And at the end of the day, customers are generally happy to give feedback. The key, as far as us as businesses are concerned, is to not make it hard for them. And there are two elements to this. There's the right mechanism, but there's also the right timing as well. So let me give you a couple of examples again. You're in a restaurant. This applies beautifully. You're in the UK and you're English or British. You'll really get this because we are terrible as a nation at complaining. You're in a restaurant. You've been served some food. It's kind of okay. You know that moment the waiter comes up. How is your food? And of course, you, particularly if you're British, will typically go, it's fine, thank you. Whereas deep down, actually, it's not bad enough to make a big scene, but it's not great. You then head home. You get a prompt for a TripAdvisor review or some other review, and of course you then start ranting. Now, why is that mechanism not appropriate? Because that human-to-human interaction in that particular situation is just not conducive to giving that negative feedback because it's a very, very personal thing. So that restaurant needs to think about a better way of doing it before the person goes home and rants about it on social media. I'll give you a second example in terms of an inappropriate mechanism. I complained to British Airways a few weeks back for something that went wrong. I got the standard kind of paragraph back, 3 or 4 lines, and some Avios credited into my account. That's great. 24 hours later, I had a 42-question survey. Now, I'm going to repeat that. 42 questions based on 3 or 4 lines worth of response, which is the most inappropriate mechanism for getting feedback. So that was ignored by me. You couldn't even fill in 1 or 2 boxes. So the fact is that probably 41 of those questions were irrelevant to that situation. So think about making your feedback mechanisms both relevant and the timing right, and allow your customers to give you feedback, because when you get it in the right way and you deal with it, more importantly, they won't leave you. Which links very nicely onto number 9. It's almost like I planned this, because incentivizing your teams to really care is where this really comes together very nicely. And again, some great examples in the business that we're in. We get sent this stuff all the time. Here we have businesses with great big charts on their walls where their employees come in and they find out every morning how they've been rated, whether it be service engineers, whether it be cleaning staff, whether it be call center agents, it doesn't matter. And whether the boards are electronic or stuck on walls, it's all the same. And what these businesses are doing, and it's just something I think is a wonderful thing, is bonusing and compensating people for how they perform based on not how the business thinks they're performing, but how their customers think they're performing. There's another example. I can't show you the video. It doesn't work so well on the WebEx, but look up that URL. This gentleman talks for approximately 1 minute on how he is incentivizing his window fitter teams around the south of England to do the right thing, to make them really care. The more gold stars they get from their customer thermometer surveys, the more money in their pay packet. So it's really empowering your teams to fix problems and do the right things with customers, but actually really making it worth their while. And they cannot complain when they're being rated by their end customers and those interactions. So my final point, number 10, is to really bring this full circle and to not allow surprises in your business, because surprises are bad, and you get 10 points if you recognize that picture that I've put up there. If you remember Japan beating South Africa in the Rugby World Cup in November last year, that was about as big a surprise as you could possibly wish for. And the key here, and what I mean by don't allow surprises, is when you are having those ongoing dialogues with customers, think about that thing, the annual customer satisfaction survey. Is that really the right mechanism to find out how customers are feeling throughout the year? Are there 364 days where something could go wrong and they leave you without telling you, so you don't really know what they're thinking? So do feedback the right way. Sure, we're one mechanism. There are others out there, but do what is right for your business to really find out what your customers are feeling, so that actually you can head off problems at the pass, so there aren't surprises. So there isn't suddenly a big pitch for a new piece of business because the contract you've got is up for grabs because they're unhappy. Find out along the way before it's too late. That's what I'm getting at with not allowing surprises. And I'll sort of wrap up here really with a quote from Disney. You may have seen this before, but customers who are mad, who are unhappy, they go home and tell their story. They rant to people about how bad things was. But if they go home happy, they will actually tell the story you want them to tell and recommend. It's not rocket science, but actually when you really put some of these ideas into practice, it can make a huge, huge difference. I'm just going to wrap up, Gary, just with one more slide here. I thought it was sort of important because I've not just talked about us and what we do with Kayako. So the quick 15 seconds on what we're all about is one-click feedback in all sorts of different email mechanisms. So we work with Kayako so that you can have that single-click response or single tap if you're answering on your mobile devices to rate how an agent has done, how a transaction has gone. Those emails could be sent out from our system directly as email thermometers, the one at the back there, or you can see an example of a thread down on the left-hand side. So that's how we work together with Kayako. It works really, really well as an integration. It takes all of about 10 minutes to set up. And so I will leave you, before we open this up for questions, I promised you a link there, and there it is. So if you go to our website /Kayako webinar or -webinar, you'll find that PDF and a whole bunch of the other links I've talked about and more, and these slides too, should you wish to use them. I hope you found it useful. I hope there was something practical and interesting in there for you. And with that, I shall hand you back to Gary.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate that. We have been getting some questions, and just want to remind everyone that you can, on Twitter, go to Stop Customers Leaving on your tweet and ask any questions you might have for Mark or Lindsay. I just want to kind of go over some things that I picked up myself, obviously from your webinar. One of the key things I picked up from what you were saying was the fact that you need to empower your staff. I think that's really a key one that I see a lot of customers kind of make a mistake on, specifically in their support departments, if they don't actually empower the support staff to actually help the customer. And I think that's one of the key takeaways that I've got from your webinar was actually that one. So let's go on to some of the questions that we've got here. So the first one we have is someone's asked to Mark or to Lindsay, if you're going for like all-hands support, what can you do to make sure the quality of support is good enough when you're actually doing that?
Qualitative support. Help me out a little bit, Gary. What's that referring to, do you think?
Okay, so I think what they're kind of saying, when you're going to all-hands support, so maybe you had a disaster or something's kind of gone wrong, so you kind of have an all-hands kind of muck in to help support, so maybe some people that are trying to help the customer aren't necessarily support staff because everyone's kind of mucking in to try and help with the load. What kind of things can you do to try and help try and make sure that the support you're giving the customer in the end is of a high enough quality that hopefully that they'd expect?
I'm with you. I'm with you. I've got a couple of thoughts on that, and then maybe we'll bring Lindsay in as well. I'm sure she'll have some ideas. So for me, this is, if I go back a couple of slides, no surprises, and that also applies to, you might want to call this disaster recovery type situation. Plan for when things go wrong. We have a plan. If our application goes down, we know what we will do. And we know how to contact our customers. We have all that stuff in place. So I think first and foremost, having planning for the worst. It's not these things happen. And then I think the second one for me is if you have that plan in place and you need that all hands, as you call it, support and bringing that together, it's about being consistent. Having the same message. So if you're dragging people down from the accounts department, say, they need to know what the party line is, what the company line is. Now that may be as simple as, we're going to be off air for 24 hours, but we'll be right back to you in 24 hours. So I guess that kind of brings the third point here is actually do what you say you're going to do. I think that's really, really important too. And if you can't, for whatever reason, you still go back and explain, we're delayed, this is going to take longer. Something I didn't mention, which I meant to, was the idea of the corporate contact us form black hole, which we all hate. And I think there is nothing worse than that. So if you've got those mechanisms in place to receive inbound feedback and comments and support requests, they have to be dealt with and communicated with, even if it's going to take 3 days to process. At least acknowledge that, and so at least that communication line is going. Lindsay, you may have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think all hands support is it's difficult to execute, particularly in a larger business, because it does pull people away from other tasks that they may need to be doing. I think the wider point, I've seen Kevin Hale, who was one of the founders of Wufoo, speak about this, and he had people cycle on and off so that it wasn't a distraction necessarily, but they took a couple of days, maybe a month, to come in and sit in the support team. So I think that's one way that you can do it time-wise. I think potentially the other thing to do is to have a situation where someone's looking over their shoulder, someone's having a look at what they're sending back, maybe coaching them through that, using some kind of feedback system, whether it's us, whether it's something else, but to make sure that that person understands how well their support has been rated in real time, so that they can see that information coming back again and act upon it. I think ultimately, what's the point of rolling out sort of all hands support? The really big thing, we do this ourselves, and the main reason we do it, I take support requests quite regularly. The main reason that we do it is because you keep a really strong finger on the pulse of what customers want your product to do in highly specific detail, and actually you really feel the burn in terms of making those product changes happen probably more quickly than if somebody within the organization emails you to say, hey, don't you think this is a good idea? So I'd have an eye on ultimately what it's there to do, which is that real sort of customer intimacy, and build the process out from there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's one of the things that we do ourselves as well, where it kind of ties in with your third kind of point when you said to people that you want to make sure kind of you always got extra mile for the customer. So in your example, you also said kind of make sure you're doing 10-15% more than what they actually asked for. At Kayako, what we do is we kind of take the customer's issue, and then afterwards we kind of go back over it and say to ourselves, how can we stop the customer from asking that again? And then we try and obviously rotate our internal product and our kind of systems to make sure that that issue doesn't actually reoccur for the customer. And obviously that's also a good way to obviously avoid churn as well. Okay, so we have another question here, and someone's saying, how do you encourage over-the-top support in your support team? And the point they make is not everyone is as lucky as you are to have your minister of magic.
Go on, Lindsay. You must have some thoughts on that one.
It's a really good question. I think for us, we are completely passionate about being one of the best companies that people have ever dealt with. And it goes across our hiring processes, and it goes across the way that we run the business, and actually it goes across the way that we help people. So we have, this is an idea I totally stole from Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1, and subsequently a book by Horowitz, of Andreessen Horowitz. But basically they talk in there about how difficult it is to, basically have a bunch of people all acting in unison. And one of the things that Horowitz did when he had a lot of product development engineers who weren't necessarily behaving the way he wanted is he wrote a one-page document called Good Product Engineer, Bad Product Engineer, and basically said good engineers operate this way, bad engineers operate that way, and wrote a one-pager that was highly specific about the very specific things that those engineers would and wouldn't do if they were to be seen as being a good one or a bad one. And he said almost overnight it changed the way that those engineers operated, because everybody wants to be seen as a good whatever they are, but sometimes it's not immediately obvious in a political environment or a big organization how to achieve those things. So that's one of the things that we've put in place, is we've got a good customer support person and bad customer support person document. And actually having a name for it, like the Ministry of Magic, helps people really understand what they're there to do. You can't have that in your job title without feeling like you really need to add that extra 10 or 20% to what you do. So, the naming is part of it, the process is, the hiring is massively part of it, but do try the good engineer, bad engineer, or good support person, bad support person document, because it actually helps you think about the behavior that you're looking for. And it makes it incredibly clear to people what you're looking for as well, and we found it to work very successfully.
I've got a couple of quick thoughts on that one as well. I appreciate that there are metrics and response times and all those sorts of things in bigger businesses. I think if you're passionate about this sort of thing and going the 10% extra, 20% extra, talk to the powers that be and say, look, let's try this for a week. Let's measure how it works. And do a genuine A/B test and see what happens, and maybe people could be persuaded. And if you still feel passionate about it and they can't, give us a call, come work for us.
Okay, cool, thank you. So we've also got a few questions. There's actually quite a few that are quite similar as well, so I'll kind of ask it a bit generically, just hopefully it covers most of the questions. So people are kind of asking what you kind of would recommend and how would you kind of do your incentivizing staff in terms of the feedback they receive, and kind of how do you empower that?
I'll go for it. Sorry. So our broad view on it is that a discretionary amount of pay should be tied to getting customer feedback. I'm speaking specifically for people who are working in support teams here, but using something like our service, and certainly what we've seen other people do, is they take a discretionary amount and basically allow for certain service above what we would call gold and green, so kind of your net promoter, promoter side of your spectrum, that you're able to say, okay, percentage-wise, in terms of the number of clicks that you receive, if you get over a certain percentage of promoters or happy people, that they could either get, a bonus for that, or that part of their bonus could be factored around that, rather than necessarily just call time or first resolution, because, a lot of the time it does take more than one interaction to get a customer to the right place and delight them. There's a book which I really recommend, actually, which is called Effortless Service, in which the authors of that talk about how one of the key drivers of customer delight is actually not the sort of wow factor. It's not blowing their socks off by sending them something crazy or doing something crazy. It's actually just getting the job done in the most effortless way possible. So if something does go wrong with their product or service, they don't go, oh no, I've got to contact that company. They go, fantastic, I've got to contact that company because I know they'll solve it really quickly. So, I definitely would look at that. I think one of the things that we have a lot of facilities clients and cleaning clients. A lot of those guys hand out what they call made dollars. So they have a bunch of dollars that can be redeemed against spa treatments or other bits and pieces. And for every gold piece of feedback they get from a customer, those made dollars are distributed. So it doesn't necessarily have to be sort of directly bonus related, but there are definitely some options around made dollars or perk type remuneration as well.
Okay, cool. I mean, one thing that we do at Kayako, which you might want to check out, is we use something called Bonusly, and that's quite a good thing because it lets you kind of reward staff for being kind of going above and beyond for customers, but staff can actually reward each other as well, and they kind of accrue some points, and then they can spend those points on various kind of rewards that we do in Churn and stuff. And so that's quite a good way to kind of keep track of it internally and kind of promote your staff to try and help each other and the customers with more effort. So we've got some more questions here. Someone wants to know, is Customer Thermometer a replacement for NPS or CSAT?
No, I wouldn't say it's a replacement. You can measure NPS using Customer Thermometer. We've got a setting within the system where you can flick it on and use it to measure NPS. The way that I would sort of position it really is, you know, your public-facing business may well sell, you know, retail products. It may well send people out. It may do all sorts of different things. And you know, you might have products rated, you might have the delivery of those products rated, you might have, you know, the projects themselves that you're carrying out. It depends what kind of business you are. But actually, you know, in a support environment, our view is, and we can absolutely back this up in terms of the statistics that we see day to day on the application. If someone in your support team has carried out a piece of support for somebody, and they don't get a survey or they don't get asked for feedback about that piece of support until 24 or 48 hours later, the response rate drops, the immediacy drops, and the interest in giving the feedback really drops. What we do is we allow anybody to embed a little signature strip within any agent's footer in pretty much any help desk solution to be able to say, right, you know, how was this response for you right now, so that the customer can, you know, particularly if the agent's closed the ticket, the customer can say, do you know what, actually that wasn't a great response and I would like something done about it. So I think it's you know, in terms of the support embedded, you know, Kayako view on it, it is an enhancement or a supplement to, you know, you can measure CSAT, you can measure NPS, it can supplement the scores, but it gives you a very support-centric view on it. I mean, obviously, we do have an outbound email version, a kind of MailChimp version of it, so you can use that to, you know, be triggered immediately after a service has been delivered or immediately after a product's been delivered. So there's that option on it too. But in the environment in which we're sort of talking about it today, I don't think it's a replacement, it's an enhancement. And, you know, our API allows you to pull those stats and those results directly back into, you know, your own reporting or into any of the sort of, you know, popular dashboard tools that are out there. So there's a lot of options, but I think it just gives you a very quick real-time view on your support, and ultimately it stops customers leaving and stops them jumping onto social media and ranting if you can fix it before they have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree. I don't think it is a replacement for NPS or CSAT. It makes it more accurate, I would say, but you certainly need to be kind of running those along with various other tools to make sure you're getting the full picture for the customer. So we have another question here which I'll try and cover because I think we are getting quite late on time as well. Someone wants to know, what do you recommend when dealing with angry customers? What would you say that kind of like the top best 5 ways to resolve that situation would be? And they've also asked how that conversation kind of be turned painless from where it started.
I probably can't do 5 in the time that we've got left, but certainly we've got some thoughts on that on our blog, so I'll make sure that we put the link to that on the Kayako webinar link that's on the screen in the next couple of hours. Certainly from our experience, the first thing to do is to get back to that customer as quickly as possible. And to have as much of if at all possible, to get them on the phone. And just the first thing I would do is apologise. You know, whether you think it's your fault or not, actually it doesn't matter. It's the customer's opinion that does matter. So, you know, in the instances where we've had unhappy customers, that's been the first thing, is actually to get to that situation and actually try and diffuse the anger, because I think the customers go through, you know, there's a classic sort of change curve, which if you haven't heard about it, you can Google. There's a really good graph that shows the stages that people go through when something changes, and anger is one of the earliest reactions to a change, which is ultimately, if you've let them down, it's a change in how you're dealing with them, and so they go through that curve. Diffusing the anger is the biggest way, I think, that you can actually then really understand what it is that's the problem. You know, a lot of the time, I think as well, it's on email, it's really, really easy to either underestimate how angry somebody is or to underestimate it. So, if at all possible, I think, get them on the phone, apologise and diffuse the situation. That would be the very first step. And then obviously from that point on, there's some question marks about, so why are they angry? What's caused it? What can we do immediately, and what can we do in the long term? And I think, the other thing is at that point, obviously you've missed the customer's expectations in some way, shape or form. The worst thing you can do at that point is then overpromise and underdeliver. So I think, even if the fix is going to take 2 days rather than 2 minutes, you're better off saying that at that point in time and being utterly clear, rather than potentially making it worse. Even though the temptation is to try and fix it in 2 seconds flat, that can't always be done. So that would be my kind of immediate reaction. I think we do have some other thoughts on that, which I'm sure we've done a blog post on. So I'll get that posted onto our webpage in the next hour or so.
Briefly, just my 2 pence on that. I just remember this curve, and I think as an individual within a business dealing with an angry customer, first of all, remember they're a human being, so therefore emotion will always come into things, and emotion also will disappear from things over time. Typically no one will have died, and so sometimes people need to get things into perspective. But understanding that service recovery graph, I think is just a fascinating thing. So you being an agent on the receiving end of an angry customer, having having that curve in mind when you receive that initial email might be quite an inspiring thing to do. If you bear that in mind, think actually I'm going to take it through this situation here, this curve, and I'm going to get it past and back up the other side, is a fascinating thing to do. The other thing that's just sprung into my mind, one of our customers, we have some bespoke reporting done for them where they actually measure, so tickets actually go on they might go on for a couple of weeks in terms of responding to a ticket. It might be quite complex, and using our service, they're able to rate that every response before that ticket's been closed. So there might be 5 or 10 emails within the thread, and they've actually picked out tickets where people have been hitting the red light at the beginning and they've got a gold star at the end. They pick those out actively every month, and they go and talk to that agent and they go and find out how they turn that situation around, which is a fascinating thing to do. But keep one eye on that service recovery paradox graph and you'll remember everything's okay.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's really good advice. I think the biggest thing you've got there is kind of calling the customer. It's sometimes I've got tendencies to reply via email or via their case system, and sometimes just picking up the phone and talking to them lets the customer know a couple of things, and the biggest one of which is that you actually care and you want to look after them. And so certainly for sure that should be the go-to, especially when a customer is definitely hot and they're angry. Sometimes that helps diffuse the situation because you can understand the problem better just from actually talking to them. So we are actually out of time today. We do actually have several kind of questions that we haven't actually answered live. If your question is one of those, we will actually catch up with you offline and answer those questions for you. I just want to remind everyone, also if you use the tweet at Stop Customers Leaving, you can actually win the 3-month thermometer account on the jumper plan. So obviously make sure you do that, and we will also announce who wins that after the webinar as well. So I'd like to thank Mark and Lindsay for attending today, and everyone who's helped joining us. Really appreciate it.